I should have known something was off the moment Ava insisted on coming with us. She never joined simple errands like grocery shopping. Ava preferred places with polished floors, soft lighting, and people who noticed her. Yet that morning, there she was, standing by the door at exactly 10, dressed like she was heading to a photo shoot instead of a supermarket. Her dark hair was pulled into a sleek knot, her nails freshly done, her expression already irritated, as if the day had disappointed her before it even began. "Let's go, Charlotte," she said, not looking at me. "We don't have all day." I followed quietly. My son Daniel was already in the car, scrolling through his phone. My grandson Leo sat in the back, tapping impatiently on the window. "Hey, Grandma," he said when I opened the door. "Can we get donuts after?" That small question warmed me more than it should have. It had been a while since anyone asked me for anything that wasn't a chore. "I'd like that," I replied softly, easing myself into the seat beside him. My knees weren't what they used to be. Every movement reminded me of that. Still, I tried not to show it. Ava glanced at me in the rearview mirror. Just a flicker of her eyes, but enough. "Try not to slow us down in there," she muttered. Quiet enough for Daniel not to hear. Loud enough for me. I didn't answer. There was no point anymore. The store was busy, crowded in that restless, everyday way. People rushing, carts squeaking, children whining for snacks. The kind of place where no one notices you unless you cause a scene. I used to like that. Being invisible felt safe. We moved through the aisles with Ava leading, her list held like a command sheet. She didn't ask what anyone needed. She decided. Daniel followed without question. Leo trailed behind her, occasionally glancing back at me. I couldn't tell if it was kindness or habit. I walked last. Always last. At the checkout, I felt it, that tightness in my chest I couldn't explain. The cashier was a young man, maybe 25. He had kind eyes. The kind you notice because they're rare. "Good morning," he said when I stepped forward. "How are you today?" I opened my mouth to answer. But Ava stepped in front of me. "She's with us," she said sharply. Then, with a small, careless wave of her hand, she added, "Don't worry about her. She helps around the house." I froze. The words didn't land all at once. They sank slowly. Heavy. Final. The cashier hesitated. His expression shifted, confusion, then discomfort. He looked at me again, as if trying to understand. Before he could say anything, Daniel laughed. Not awkwardly. Not politely. He laughed like it was genuinely funny. "Yeah," he added, still smiling. "She keeps things running." Leo chuckled too. "Grandma's like our assistant," he said, half joking, half not. Something inside me cracked then. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just enough. I stood there, gripping my bag, so tightly my fingers ached. I didn't trust myself to speak. The cashier stopped looking at me. Just like that. I disappeared. "Card or cash?" he asked Ava, his tone colder now. "Card," she replied, completely unfazed. Around us, people were watching. Some curious. Some amused. Some pretending not to notice. I wished I could disappear entirely. The walk back to the car felt longer than it was. Ava talked about dinner plans. Daniel responded absent-mindedly. Leo asked about a video game. No one mentioned what had just happened. No one looked at me. At home, I carried the bags inside. Of course I did. I always did. They moved on with their day. Ava to her calls, Daniel to his laptop, Leo to his room. And I stayed in the kitchen, putting everything away, piece by piece, like nothing had happened. But something had. I just didn't know what yet. That evening, I sat alone in my room, if you could even call it that. It used to be a guest room. Small. Barely enough space for a bed and a dresser. 5 years ago, when Ava moved in, she had smiled sweetly and said, "It just makes more sense if you take this one." I had agreed. I always agreed. I looked around slowly. At the narrow bed. At the faded curtains. At the mirror on the wall. The woman staring back at me looked distant. Smaller than I remembered. When had that happened? When had I become someone who accepted being erased? I sat down and closed my eyes. And for the first time in a long time, I tried to remember who I used to be. Not the version they saw. Not the version I played. The real one. I wasn't always like this. I used to run things. Not a big empire. Not anything flashy. But something real. Something mine. I had built a small catering service years ago. It started in this very house. People used to call me directly, asking for my cooking, my recipes,
My time.
I was respected, needed.
Alive.
Then slowly, it all disappeared. Ava didn't like it. Too messy, too noisy, too unnecessary. Daniel agreed with her. Of course he did. And one by one, I let it go.
Client.
Orders. Purpose. Until there was nothing left but routine. But that night, something felt different. The words from the store echoed in my mind. She helps around the house. Not even said with cruelty. Worse. With certainty. I stood up and walked to my closet. Pushed past the clothes. Reached the back. My fingers found the cold metal surface I hadn't touched in years. The safe. For a moment I hesitated. Then I opened it. Inside were documents. Neatly organized. Carefully preserved. Proof of a life I had quietly continued building, even while pretending not to exist. Investments. Ownership papers. Accounts. Decisions. All mine. I sat down on the edge of the bed, holding them. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I felt something else. Something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in a long time.
Clarity.
Maybe the problem wasn't how they treated me. Maybe the problem was that I had allowed them to believe it was acceptable. I looked back at the mirror. Same face. Same gray hair. Same tired eyes. But something behind them had changed. And for the first time, I wondered what would happen if I stopped playing along. That night, I didn't sleep much. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the same moment replaying itself. The cashier's kind expression turning distant, Ava's dismissive gesture, Daniel's laughter. But what stayed with me the most wasn't the humiliation itself. It was how natural it all seemed to them. As if this version of me, the quiet, invisible woman who helped around the house, was the only one that had ever existed. By morning, something inside me had settled into place. Not anger, not yet. Something colder. Clearer. I got dressed earlier than usual, choosing a simple but well-fitted coat I hadn't worn in years. No one noticed, of course. Ava was still asleep, Daniel had already left for work, and Leo was rushing through breakfast before school. I moved through the kitchen like I always did, preparing coffee, packing a quick lunch, wiping the counter. But my mind was somewhere else entirely. "I'll be out for a while today," I said quietly. Leo barely looked up. Okay. That was it. No questions. No concern. Just acceptance that I came and went like background noise. I stepped outside and closed the door behind me, breathing in the cool morning air. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was sneaking out of my own life. I walked with purpose. My first stop wasn't random. It had been waiting for me for years. The office building stood exactly as I remembered it. Glass doors, polished floors, the quiet hum of people who knew where they were going. I hadn't been here in a long time, but nothing felt unfamiliar. If anything, it felt like returning to a version of myself I had abandoned. At the front desk, a young receptionist looked up at me politely. "Can I help you?" "Yes," I said calmly. "I have business to attend to. I'd like to speak with Mr. Carter." She hesitated for a moment, scanning her system. "Do you have an appointment?"
No. Iraplia.
"But you can tell him Charlotte is here. He'll understand." For a second, I wondered if that was still true. Time changes things. People forget. But not everything. A few minutes later, I heard quick footsteps approaching. Then a familiar voice. "Charlotte." I turned. There he was, older, of course, a little grayer, but unmistakably the same man. His expression shifted from confusion to surprise, then to something warmer. I didn't expect to see you, he said, stepping closer. It's been years. I know, I answered. Too many. He gestured toward his office.
Come in.
Please. The room hadn't changed much either. Same desk, same shelves, same quiet authority in the way everything was arranged. I sat down across from him, folding my hands in my lap. You look different, he said carefully. So do you, I replied, allowing myself a faint smile. He studied me for a moment, then leaned back. What brings you here, Charlotte? I didn't hesitate. I want to review everything, I said. All accounts, all holdings, every document tied to my name. His expression sharpened immediately. That's quite a request.
I'm aware.
Something happened, he said, not as a question. I met his gaze. Yes. He didn't push further. That was something I always respected about him. He understood that details came when they were ready, not before. All right, he said, reaching for a folder. Let's start from the top. The next hour passed differently than any time I had spent in years. Numbers, contracts, ownership percentages, things that once felt natural to me came back with surprising ease. It was like waking up a part of my mind that had been asleep, but not gone. You've done well, he said at one point, almost impressed. Better than you probably realize. I never stopped paying attention, I replied. I just stopped showing it. He nodded slowly, understanding more than I had said out loud. We went through everything. Investments that had grown quietly over time. Properties managed under different entities. Shares in businesses I had chosen carefully years ago. It wasn't just stability, it was control. And I still had it. When we finished, he closed the folder and looked at me directly. So, what do you want to do now? That question lingered. For years, my answer would have been simple. Whatever keeps the peace. But that answer no longer existed. I want changes, I said finally. Legal ones. He leaned forward slightly. What kind of changes? My will, I said. My ownership structures. Access to my accounts. Everything. He didn't react immediately, but I could see the shift in his posture. This wasn't casual anymore. That's significant, he said. Are you sure you're ready for that? I thought about the store, about the laughter, about the way I had stood there, invisible in front of strangers. Yes, I said. I am. He nodded once. Then you'll need an attorney. Someone discreet. I was hoping you'd recommend one. I will, he said. And Charlotte, whatever this is about, make sure you're doing it for the right reasons. I am, I replied. For the first time in a long time, I am. My second stop was quieter. Smaller office. Less polished, but more personal. The kind of place where conversations mattered more than appearances. The attorney listened carefully as I explained what I wanted. Not everything. Just enough. You're not the first person to come in with a story like this, she said after a while. That doesn't make it easier, I replied. No, she agreed. But it does make it clearer. We discussed options, structures, protections, ways to ensure that decisions remained mine and mine alone. What about your family? She asked at one point. I paused. They've made their position clear, I said. And yours? I'm still deciding, I answered honestly. She nodded, jotting something down. We'll prepare everything. But understand, once these changes are made, they're not easy to undo. I don't intend to undo them. By the time I stepped back outside, the sun was lower in the sky. The day had passed quickly, but it didn't feel wasted. It felt reclaimed. When I returned home, Ava was in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone while making something that looked more decorative than edible. She glanced up as I walked in. Where were you? She asked, already annoyed. Out, I said simply. Doing what? Personal matters. She frowned. What personal matters?
You don't have anything like that.
I set my bag down calmly. I do, I said. Something in my tone must have caught her off guard because she actually looked at me for a second longer than usual. Well, she said finally, next time let someone know. We can't just have you disappearing. The irony almost made me smile. I'll keep that in mind, I replied. That evening felt the same on the surface. Dinner, silence, routine. But underneath it, everything had changed.
They just didn't know it yet.
And for once, I wasn't the one being left in the dark. 3 days passed after my visits, and I found myself watching everything differently. Not reacting, watching. It was a strange shift, like stepping outside of a life I had been trapped inside for years and finally seeing it clearly. Every word, every glance, every small command disguised as a request, it all stood out now in a way it hadn't before. I realized something uncomfortable. Nothing about their behavior had changed. Only my awareness had. That afternoon, I returned from a walk earlier than usual. The front door was slightly open, just enough for voices to slip through. Ava's laugh carried out first, sharp, controlled, the kind she used when she wanted to impress people.
She had guests.
That wasn't unusual. What was unusual was the way my name followed shortly after. I stopped. I didn't mean to listen. At least, that's what I told myself at first. But something in her tone held me in place, like a quiet warning. I don't know how much longer I can deal with it, Ava said. It's exhausting. Another voice responded, female, unfamiliar. Why don't you just do something about it? Ava laughed again, softer this time. If it were that easy, I would have already. Daniel gets all emotional whenever I bring it up. You know how he is about his mother. There was a pause, then a sip of something, probably wine. She's just always there, Ava continued. In the kitchen, in the hallway, in the living room. Like she belongs. But she doesn't contribute anything real. It's like living with, I don't know, background noise that never turns off. My fingers tightened around the strap of my bag. She doesn't work? The other woman asked. Ava let out a small scoff. Work? Please. She cooks, cleans, watches Leo when we need her. That's not work. That's just existing. Existing. The words settled heavily. And you're just going to keep her there? The woman pressed. Ava's voice dropped slightly, more deliberate now. We're waiting. For what? Another pause. For things to resolve themselves, Ava said. Daniel thinks she might have something saved. Nothing major, but enough to be worth waiting for. It wouldn't make sense to make a move before we know. My chest tightened. They weren't just tolerating me. They were calculating. How old is she? The woman asked. 70, Ava replied. But honestly, she could go on forever. That's the problem. They both laughed. Quietly.
Casually.
Like they were discussing the weather. I didn't hear the rest. I couldn't. My ears were ringing. My thoughts too loud. I stepped back slowly, careful not to make a sound, and made my way upstairs. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the house itself had shifted beneath me. When I reached my room, I closed the door and sat down on the edge of the bed. They were waiting for me to die, not hoping I lived well, not caring how I felt, waiting. And Daniel knew. That was the part that stayed with me the most. Not Ava's cruelty. I had come to expect that. But Daniel's silence. His acceptance. The quiet agreement behind closed doors. I pressed my hands together, steadying myself. For years, I had told myself that family meant endurance, that love meant patience, that if I just kept things calm, kept myself small, things would stay stable. But this wasn't stability. This was erosion. Slow, intentional, complete. That evening, everything unfolded as usual. Dinner was prepared. Plates were set. Conversation moved around me without ever including me. Daniel talked about work. Ava complained about someone from her social circle. Leo barely looked up from his phone. And I listened, not as part of them, but as someone observing something distant. This is a little overcooked, Ava said at one point, pushing her food slightly away. You should pay more attention. I will, I replied calmly. But inside, something shifted again. Not hurt this time. Recognition. It had never been about the food.
Or the chores.
Or anything I did. It was about position. And mine had been decided long ago. After dinner, Daniel cleared his throat. Mom, he said. I looked up. We're thinking about repainting the house next month, he continued. So, you'll need to clear out your room for a few days. It wasn't a question. Of course it wasn't. Where would I stay? I asked. He shrugged slightly. Basement, probably. Just temporary. The basement. I knew exactly what that meant. The old couch with the broken frame. The damp air. The single light that flickered if you touched the switch wrong. Ava added, It's not a big deal. It's just easier that way. Easier for them. Everything always was.
Of course, I said.
And for the first time, I noticed something. Ava smiled.
Not warmly.
Not kindly. Satisfied. Later that night, I sat alone in the kitchen again. The house was quiet, but not peaceful. It felt like a place where something had ended, even if no one else had noticed yet. I thought about what I had heard earlier, about the way they spoke when they thought I wasn't listening, about the plans they made without me. And then I thought about something else. What they didn't know, the accounts, the properties, the decisions already set in motion. They saw me as someone waiting for an end. They had no idea I was standing at the beginning of something. The next morning, I didn't wait. I didn't hesitate. I woke up early, dressed carefully, and left before anyone else had fully started their day. This time, my steps felt different. Not uncertain. Not quiet. Purposeful. When I reached the office again, everything moved faster. Papers were already being prepared.
Documents outlined.
Options presented. Once you sign these, the attorney explained, there's no immediate visible change. But legally, everything shifts. That's exactly what I want, I said. She studied me for a moment. You're very calm about this. I've had years to think, I replied. I just didn't realize it until now. She nodded. We reviewed everything carefully. Every clause. Every condition. Every consequence. And then, one by one, I signed. By the time I left, it was done. Not everything, but enough. Enough to change everything that came next. When I returned home, Ava was already waiting in the kitchen. You've been out a lot lately, she said, narrowing her eyes. What's going on? Nothing you need to worry about, I answered. Her expression hardened. Charlotte, I asked you a question. I met her gaze. And for the first time in years, I didn't look away. I heard you, I said quietly. She blinked. Heard what? 3 days ago, I continued. In the living room. The silence that followed was different from any we had shared before.
Sharp.
Uncertain.
Real.
Ava's posture shifted slightly. Just enough. You shouldn't be listening to conversations that don't concern you, she said, her voice tighter now. I held her gaze. They concern me, I replied. She didn't respond.
Didn't deny it.
Didn't apologize. Of course she didn't. That wasn't who she was. I turned away first. But not because I felt small. Because I was done explaining. Everything was already in motion.
They just didn't know it yet.
And soon, they would. 2 weeks passed, and in that time I learned something unexpected. Once you stop reacting, people don't immediately notice. The legal work had progressed faster than I expected. Documents were drafted, reviewed, finalized. Accounts had been restructured. Ownership clarified. Decisions that once felt too large to face had been broken down into steps, each one manageable, each one deliberate. I didn't rush any of it. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to think carefully, not about how to avoid conflict, but about what I actually wanted. And what I wanted had very little to do with keeping the peace. That morning felt different from the moment I opened my eyes. Not dramatic, not overwhelming, just certain. I got dressed slowly, choosing clothes that felt like mine rather than simply practical. I brushed my hair with more attention than usual, Not because anyone would notice, but because I did. Small things, perhaps, but they mattered. Breakfast unfolded like it always did. Daniel sat at the table scrolling through his phone, barely acknowledging anything around him. Ava spoke about her plans for the day, her tone carrying that familiar expectation that someone would be listening, even if she wasn't speaking to them directly. Leo ate quickly, distracted, already halfway out the door in his mind. I moved through the kitchen quietly, placing plates, pouring coffee, cleaning as I went. The same actions, the same space, but not the same person. At exactly 10 o'clock, there was a knock at the door. Ava frowned immediately, looking up from her cup. "Are you expecting someone?" she asked, her voice already edged with irritation. "No," I said calmly, drying my hands. "I'll get it," I added before she could stand. When I opened the door, I wasn't surprised. The attorney stood there, composed and professional, a folder in her hands. Behind her was another man, younger, carrying a briefcase. Everything about their presence contrasted sharply with the casual disorder of the house behind me. "Good morning, Charlotte," she said. "We're right on time." "Yes," I replied. "Please come in." Ava appeared almost immediately behind me, curiosity overriding her usual indifference. "What's going on?" she demanded, her eyes moving quickly between the two visitors. "This is my attorney," I said simply, stepping aside to let them enter. The shift in the room was immediate. Even Daniel looked up from his phone, confusion replacing his usual detachment. He stood slowly, as if unsure whether he should be concerned or annoyed. "Mom," he said, "what is this?" I walked into the living room and gestured toward the seating area. "We should sit down," I said. They hesitated, but something in my tone, steady, controlled, left little room for argument. Ava sat first, her posture stiff, her eyes sharp with suspicion. Daniel followed, still trying to make sense of what he was seeing. I remained standing. The folder in my hands felt heavier than it should have, not because of the paper inside, but because of everything it represented. "I think it's time we clarify a few things," I said. Ava let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "Clarify what?" I didn't answer her immediately. Instead, I opened the folder and removed the first document, holding it carefully but without hesitation. "For years," I began, "you've both operated under certain assumptions about me, about my role here, about my circumstances." Daniel frowned. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the way you see me," I said, "and the way you've treated me because of it." Ava crossed her arms. "If this is about that ridiculous grocery store situation, it's not just about that," I interrupted calmly. "But yes, that was part of it." The room grew quieter. 3 weeks ago, I was publicly dismissed and humiliated. I continued. Not by strangers, but by my own family. And instead of correcting it, you laughed. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, it wasn't." And a few days later, I went on, I overheard a conversation about me, about my future, about how long I might live, and what might be left behind when I'm gone. Ava's expression hardened. "You were listening where you shouldn't have been." "Yes," I said. And I heard exactly what I needed to hear. Silence followed. Heavy. Unavoidable. I placed the first document on the table in front of them. "This is a formal update to my will," I said. Daniel stared at it, then at me.
"What?"
"I have made changes," I continued. "Significant ones." Ava leaned forward slightly, her voice sharper now. "What kind of changes?" "The kind that reflect reality," I replied. Daniel picked up the document, scanning it quickly. His face changed almost immediately, confusion giving way to disbelief. "This doesn't make sense," he said. "There's nothing here." "Exactly," I said. He looked up at me. "What do you mean exactly?" "It means," I said evenly, "that you are no longer included." The words settled slowly. Ava blinked, then let out a short laugh. "That's not funny." "I'm not trying to be," I replied. Daniel shook his head. "Mom, you can't just." "I can," I said. And I have. The second man stepped forward slightly, opening his briefcase. If I may, he said, his tone professional, there are additional documents that provide further context. Ava turned to him sharply. Who are you? My name is Michael Carter, he replied. I represent several business interests connected to Charlotte. The confusion in the room deepened. Business interests? Daniel repeated. I nodded once. Yes. Michael placed several papers on the table, aligning them carefully. Charlotte holds significant ownership in multiple ventures, he explained, including real estate, investment portfolios, and partial ownership in several operating businesses. Ava stared at him. That's not possible. It is, he said calmly. Daniel looked between us, his voice quieter now. How much? There was a brief pause. Combined assets, Michael said, are valued conservatively in the tens of millions. The silence that followed felt different from any before. Not dismissive. Not indifferent.
Shock pure, unfiltered shock.
Ava's composure cracked first. You're lying, she said, though there was no conviction behind it. I'm not, I replied. Daniel sat down heavily, running a hand through his hair. Why didn't you tell us? I looked at him steadily. Would it have changed anything? I asked. He didn't answer. Ava did. Yes, she said quickly. Of course it would have. I nodded slowly. I know. That was the problem. I gathered the documents back into the folder, my movements calm, deliberate. There are additional changes, I said. Legal and personal. Ava's voice dropped. What kind of changes? I met her gaze. The kind that don't involve you. No one spoke. No one argued. Because for the first time,
They didn't know how.
and for the first time in years, neither did I. Because this wasn't about reacting anymore. It was about finishing something. I turned slightly toward the hallway. I'll be packing today, I said. I won't be staying here much longer. Daniel looked up quickly.
What?
This arrangement is over, I said. Ava stood abruptly. You can't just walk out like that. I paused. Then I looked at her one last time. I'm not walking out, I said quietly. I'm moving on. And this time, I meant it. I didn't leave immediately that day, even though every part of me was ready to. Not out of hesitation, and not because I had changed my mind, but because I wanted to leave on my terms, not in a rush, not as someone escaping. There's a difference between running away and walking away, and for the first time in years, I understood it clearly. The house felt different after that conversation. Not physically, everything was exactly where it had always been, but the atmosphere had shifted. The quiet wasn't comfortable anymore. It wasn't routine silence. It was tension, uncertainty, something unsettled that none of them knew how to handle. Ava didn't speak to me for the rest of the day. Not a single word. She moved around the house with sharp, controlled movements, her composure cracking just enough to reveal something underneath. Panic, perhaps, or anger that she couldn't immediately fix the situation. Daniel tried twice to start a conversation, but both times he stopped halfway, as if he didn't know what version of me he was supposed to be talking to anymore. Leo stayed in his room longer than usual, quieter than I had ever seen him. I packed slowly. Not because I had a lot of things, quite the opposite. Over the years, I had reduced myself to the essentials. A few clothes, some personal items, documents that mattered. Everything else in that room had never truly been mine, just space I was allowed to occupy. As I folded my clothes, I found myself pausing more than once, not out of nostalgia, but out of realization. I had spent years making myself smaller, lighter, easier to ignore. I had removed pieces of myself little by little, thinking it would make things smoother, calmer. But all it had done was make it easier for them to treat me as if I didn't exist at all. By evening, my suitcase was ready. It didn't take much. That somehow said more than anything else. Daniel knocked on my door, just as I was closing it. Mom, can we talk? I looked at him for a moment before answering. We are talking. He exhaled, stepping into the room without waiting for permission. that at least hadn't changed. He glanced at the suitcase, then back at me. "You're serious," he said. "Yes." "This is a lot," he continued, running a hand through his hair. "You don't just drop something like that on people." I tilted my head slightly. "Don't I?" His expression tightened. "That's not fair." "No," I said calmly. "What's not fair is everything that led up to this." He didn't respond immediately. For a moment, I saw something familiar in his face. Not the man he had become, but the boy he used to be. The one who needed guidance, who looked to me for answers. But that moment passed quickly. "You should have told us," he said finally. I held his gaze. "Why?" "So we could understand," he replied, though even he didn't seem convinced. "Would you have?" I asked. He hesitated, and that hesitation was enough. Ava appeared in the doorway then, her presence filling the space immediately. "This is ridiculous," she said. "You're blowing everything out of proportion." I didn't react. "It was a joke at the store," she continued, "and you're acting like it was some kind of betrayal." I met her eyes. "It wasn't a joke," I said quietly. "It was a reflection," she scoffed. "Of what?" "Of how you see me," I answered. Her expression hardened. "You're being dramatic." "No," I said. "I'm being clear." Silence stretched between us. Then, as if switching tactics, Ava's tone shifted, softer now, almost calculated. "Look," she said, "we can fix this. We can move forward. There's no reason to make things extreme." I almost smiled, not because it was amusing, but because it was predictable. "Fix what?" I asked. "This situation," she replied quickly. "We didn't know certain things. Now we do. That changes things." "Yes," I said. "It does." Relief flickered across her face.
But it didn't last.
"Just not in the way you think." Daniel stepped forward again. "Mom, please. We're family." I looked at him carefully. "Family doesn't mean permanent access," I said. His face fell slightly. "That's not what I meant." "I know," I replied. "That's the problem." No one spoke after that. There was nothing left to say that hadn't already been revealed. I picked up my suitcase and walked past them. The front door felt heavier than usual when I opened it, but not because of doubt, because of finality. I stepped outside and didn't look back. The hotel wasn't far, but it felt like another world.
Clean.
Quiet. Neutral.
No expectations.
No roles. Just space. For the first time in years, I had a room that belonged entirely to me, not because someone allowed it, but because I chose it. I set my suitcase down and sat by the window, looking out at the city. Cars moved below. People passed by. Life continued in its usual rhythm. Nothing had changed out there, but everything had changed for me. The following weeks were not dramatic. There were no sudden confrontations, no emotional breakdowns, no desperate attempts to pull me back. Instead, there were calls, messages, voicemails. Daniel tried to reach me several times. His tone shifted with each attempt, from confusion to apology, from apology to something closer to desperation. Ava sent messages too, though hers were different, less emotional, more strategic. She spoke about solutions, about compromise, about working things out. Not once did she speak about respect. I didn't respond. Not immediately. Not because I was punishing them, but because I was finally giving myself space to think without pressure. In that space, something unexpected happened. I began to remember what it felt like to make decisions without fear. I met with advisors, reviewed options, restructured what needed to be restructured. Every step was deliberate, every choice mine. But more than that, I began to feel something I hadn't felt in a very long time.
Peace.
Not the fragile kind that depends on everyone behaving correctly. Real peace. The kind that exists even when everything else is uncertain. One afternoon, as I sat in a quiet cafe reviewing documents, my phone rang.
Le.
I hesitated before answering. "Hello. Grandma?" His voice sounded different, quieter. "Hi," I said gently. There was a pause. "I wanted to say something," he continued. I waited. "I'm sorry," he said.
About that day.
"At the store." My chest tightened slightly. "I shouldn't have laughed," he added. I knew it wasn't right. I closed my eyes for a moment. "Thank you for saying that," I replied. Another pause. "Are you coming back?" he asked. The question was simple, but the answer wasn't. "No," I said softly. "Not like before." Silence followed, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was honest. After the call ended, I sat there for a long time, not thinking about what I had lost, but about what I had gained.
Clarity. Control.
Myself. And for the first time in years, that felt like enough. 6 months later, I woke up to silence. Not the heavy kind I used to know, the kind filled with unspoken tension and careful steps, but a different silence. Open.
Calm.
The kind that belongs to a place where nothing is expected from you unless you choose it. The sunlight filtered gently through the curtains, warm but not harsh, settling across the room in a way that felt almost deliberate. For a few moments, I stayed still, simply taking it in.
No voices downstairs.
No footsteps in the hallway. No sense that I needed to get up immediately and start doing something for someone else.
Just time. Mine.
It still felt unfamiliar sometimes, but not uncomfortable anymore. The apartment I had chosen wasn't extravagant, but it was exactly what I needed. Spacious enough to breathe, simple enough to feel like home. Large windows overlooking the water, a small balcony where I could sit in the evenings, and a kitchen that belonged entirely to me, not a place of obligation, but of choice. I got up slowly, made coffee, and stepped out onto the balcony. The city moved below me in its usual rhythm, cars passing, people walking, distant sounds blending into a quiet hum of life continuing. I watched it without feeling disconnected, but also without feeling pulled into it. For years, my life had been centered around other people's needs. Now, I observed the world without needing to fit myself into it. And that was enough. The transition hadn't been instant. After leaving the house, I had spent several weeks organizing everything, finalizing legal structures, reviewing financial plans, deciding what to keep and what to let go. It wasn't overwhelming, not in the way I expected. It was methodical. Each decision built on the last, creating something steady, something intentional. I didn't need everything I owned. That realization came quickly. Some properties were sold. Others were transferred into management. Investments were consolidated. Not because I had to, but because I wanted clarity.
Simplicity. Control.
For the first time, I wasn't building something for the future out of fear. I was shaping it out of choice. Daniel continued to call during those first months. At first, I didn't answer. Then, eventually, I did. The first conversation was awkward, careful, full of pauses and unfinished sentences. He apologized more than once. Not just for the store, but for things he hadn't even fully put into words before. There was sincerity in his voice, but also something else. Regret mixed with realization. I didn't see it, he admitted at one point. I know, I replied. That was the truth. He hadn't seen it. Or maybe he had, and chose not to. Either way, the result was the same. I want to fix things, he said. I didn't answer immediately, because I understood something now that I hadn't before. Not everything needs to be fixed. Some things need to be acknowledged, and left where they belong. Ava never called. She sent messages at first, carefully worded, controlled, trying to frame everything as a misunderstanding. Then, when that didn't work, her tone shifted. Less polite, more demanding. Eventually, the messages stopped altogether. I didn't miss them. Leo called every week. At first, it was uncertain. Short conversations, pauses filled with things he didn't know how to say. But over time, those calls changed. He asked questions. Not about money, not about decisions, but about me. What I was doing. How I spent my days. What I liked. It surprised me more than I expected. Are you happy? He asked once. The question caught me off guard. I thought about it before answering. Yes, I said. And I meant it. He told me about school, about friends, about things that felt small but weren't. Sometimes he mentioned his parents, though less often as time went on. I didn't ask for details. I didn't need to. Some things unfold on their own. One afternoon, as I was organizing papers at my desk, I received a letter. Not an email, not a message. A letter. The handwriting was familiar.
Ava.
For a moment, I considered setting it aside. But curiosity won. Inside were several pages. The tone shifted throughout, controlled at first, then frustrated, then almost pleading. She wrote about how difficult things had become, about changes she hadn't expected, about how everything had fallen apart faster than she anticipated. She asked for help. Financial help, support, understanding. At one point, she even suggested that things could still be worked out. I read it carefully, once. Then I folded it. There was no anger.
No satisfaction.
Just clarity. I stood up, walked to the kitchen, and placed the letter into the drawer. Not as something to keep, but as something already decided. That evening, I went for a walk along the waterfront. The air was cooler, the sky shifting slowly into shades of gold and blue. People passed by, some alone, some in groups, each carrying their own stories, their own lives. For a long time, I had believed that my story was tied to the people around me, that my role defined me, that my place in their lives was my purpose. But now, walking there alone, I understood something different. I had always been the center of my own story. I had just forgotten it. Later that night, I sat by the window with a cup of tea, looking out at the lights reflecting on the water. My phone buzzed. A message from Leo. Can I visit you sometime? I smiled slightly. Maybe, I replied. When the time is right. There was a pause. Then another message. I just want to see you. I looked at the screen for a moment before answering. I'd like that too. I set the phone down and leaned back in my chair. For the first time in years, the future didn't feel like something to endure or prepare for. It felt open, unwritten.
Mine.
I thought about everything that had happened. The store, the laughter, the silence that followed. The moment things began to shift. It hadn't been sudden. It hadn't been dramatic. It had been a decision. A quiet one, but powerful enough to change everything. Some people would say, I lost my family. Maybe they were right. But as I sat there, in a space I had chosen, in a life I had built on my own terms, I didn't feel like I had lost anything. I felt like I had finally stopped giving away parts of myself to people who never intended to protect them. And that realization was worth everything. For the first time in a long time, I didn't wonder what would happen next. I simply waited to see it, not with fear, but with something I had almost forgotten existed. Anticipation. Because this wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of a life I had finally chosen for myself.